Hello there, and welcome to the Vipers Fantasy Network NFL Free Agency Frenzy. That's right, I'm Matt Dolly, and I'm going to go through all the moves that have taken place so far to kick off the 2024 NFL free agency period. That's right, legal tampering is done. Now we're officially to the point where we can sign players. So careful, there could be some swerving of the moose going on here because things can change in a hurry. But legal tampering has allowed us to get a pretty good idea of what's about to take place. Starting with, for instance, what's been going on in Chicago. The Chicago Bears signed running back DeAndre Swift to a 3-year, $24.5 million contract there, with $15.3 million of that guaranteed. In 2023-2024 season there, the Bears averaged 141 yards per game on the ground, which bodes well for Swift, who is coming off his first 1,000-yard season of his career. Last season with the Eagles, Swift averaged 4.6 yards per carry on the ground while contributing 214 yards on 39 receptions for that Eagles passing attack. Now, Chicago, they enter this free agency period with an opportunity to build around a rookie contract there at the quarterback position. They hold that number one deal, and by all indications, we're looking at a Caleb Williams type situation there in Chicago, even though they have not found a suitor for Justin Fields, and they are threatening to, hey, maybe we'll trade the first overall pick and keep Justin Fields. No, you're not. Stop it. You're going to select Caleb Williams in the first overall pick one way or the other. They also had the number 9 pick, and many people out there are predicting another offensive piece to go along with a future quarterback, to go along with DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, and now DeAndre Swift. For fantasy purposes, I expect Swift to flirt with RB1 type numbers there, finishing in that RB10 to 15 range. And when all's said and done, he could see a slight uptick thanks to the perceived passing work and not having to deal with Jalen Hurts down on the goal line. As for Rashawn Johnson and Khalil Herbert, their values, they are directly tied into Swift's health. And you know what? Maybe they're worth a flyer, but I'm pretty much avoiding both these backs at all costs. Chicago was uninspired by Herbert's 2023 performance after parting ways with David Montgomery, who ended up having a pretty big year there in Detroit last season. This is clearly the Bears' way of trying to attempt to right a wrong. Swift is currently RB17, 74th overall, with an ADP of RB20, which is 83rd overall, prior to signing with the Bears. So we can expect that ADP to somewhat climb upwards. However, a closer look at Swift's efficiency numbers are some reasons for concern. We're not going to get into that right now. Now, Chicago, they have been busy during free agency, especially during that legal tampering period there, where they went out there and re-signed one of their own in Jalen Johnson. They also added safety Kevin Byard to a 2-year, $15 million deal. Chicago rights a wrong, and now they look to build around a rookie quarterback. The signing of DeAndre Swift is a B+ when it comes to fantasy. Another big move that took place here early on was the fact that we heard T. Higgins requesting a trade, which really shouldn't come to a surprise to many of us there after the Bengals had slapped the franchise tag on the all-pro wide receiver. Higgins requested that trade after the two sides essentially failed to come to an agreement on a long-term deal. Now, I'm still not convinced that the Bengals will agree to trade their star wide receiver here, even after a request is made. This is business, and business, it has been booming there in Cincinnati. They have no real deal to make when it's all out there. I mean, they're not going to go trade him to the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm going to tell you that right now. Now, when we look at this a little bit closer, if you're T. Higgins, you're looking for a deal very similar to what Michael Pittman got here early on. Maybe a 3-year deal worth $71.5 million, $46 million of that guaranteed. That's probably the basic template there, the framework on any kind of deal with T. Higgins. Perhaps the request is nothing more than an attempt on the T. Higgins side to get both sides back to the table, as there hasn't been those long-term contract negotiations since that franchise tag had been applied. Remember, it was only a month ago when Higgins listed his top 4 quarterbacks that he'd like to play for. We all saw the interview there with Lauren Jackson, reuniting with Trevor Lawrence there in Jacksonville, heading to Houston to play with C.J. Stroud, catching passes from Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Heck, those are appealing to me. I'm not even a franchise-type wide receiver. Any receiver in the National Football League would love to catch passes from any one of those 4 players. Now, the problem with all those locations is by trading T. Higgins there, the Bengals would actually be strengthening conference opponents, and it makes it much more difficult to run through that AFC gauntlet on your way to the Super Bowl. When all is said and done, I wouldn't be shocked if Higgins does remain as a Cincinnati Bengal, at least for this season. Now, be careful, young fella, what you're going to ask for, because the Carolina Panthers and the New York Giants are both teams who are in need of a wide receiver and have been linked to the Pro Bowl pass catcher who has accumulated 3,684 yards, 24 touchdowns in his 4-year career thus far. Now, another big deal that we heard early on was Russell Wilson signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. This seems like a decent fit. It's not a sexy destination, but the Steelers proved last season that they're basically a quarterback away from making a serious playoff push. And we've seen what they've done here during this free agent period. They went out there and they got themselves a Patrick Queen there to run that Steel City. I mean, the Steel Curtain is back in Pittsburgh, baby. I'm telling you this right now. Now, I know we heard this when Wilson landed there in Denver, that he has all the weapons to work with. It's true. Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, they never became his Tyler Lockett or his DK Metcalf, but there is hope that George Pickens can help return Russell Wilson to his Pro Bowl status. Not only will Wilson have Pickens to work with, but you can add a Pat Freiermuth there, Calvin Austin, a pair of backs, and Najee Harris and Jalen Warren to help ease that load. Pittsburgh will remain a run-first team, which is going to take pressure off of Wilson and allow him to take some deep shots. It also doesn't hurt knowing that if he does make a mistake, he has that elite defense that is going to bail him out more often than not. It does hurt that the Pittsburgh Steelers did trade Deontay Johnson to the Carolina Panthers, who would have provided Wilson with a nice, secure blanket down on the field. But management, they must feel pretty good that when it comes to Calvin Austin, or they have an eye on a receiver early in this year's draft that they actually like. Now, this is a low-risk, high-reward type move for the Steelers. It's a cheap deal, as Wilson is still getting a nice payday there by the Broncos. And Coach Tomlin, he's going to welcome Wilson with open arms after watching the failed Kenny Pickett experiment and having Mason Rudolph come in as his best option last year. 1 year, $1.2 million. I'm not sure that Wilson is really an upgrade on Mason Rudolph, but at that price, the Steelers are playing with the Broncos' money, and that's an A+ for me. Well, let's call it an A. We won't get too excited about that. Now, one team that's also making big splashes, they're going to come on this show here in multiple spots, is the Tennessee Titans, as they signed former Dallas Cowboys running back Tony Pollard. Tennessee, they've moved on from Derrick Henry, and now they're going to deploy a combination of Tajay Spears and Pollard in their backfield, as Pollard inks a 3-year deal with the Titans worth $24 million, which makes sense here, as there are concerns about how Tony Pollard can carry a load and how Tajay Spears probably doesn't hold up to a full workload himself. Now, Pollard, he moves on from the Cowboys after being franchise tagged last season. There's a little bit of a developing theme here about being franchised and then getting out of Dodge. We're going to talk about that with a couple different running backs. Now, he had 4,950 total yards and 28 touchdowns during his 5 years with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, one thing that we did learn about Pollard is that he's much more efficient when he splits those touches. So look for this backfield to be split in Tennessee for the next couple seasons, as we've seen both Pollard and Spears ball out when given an opportunity to do so. Pollard's numbers last season were somewhat deceiving, as he really struggled on for the first 10 weeks of the season. And there are rumors out there that he wasn't 100% during that time. And you know what? That kind of makes sense. If you look at the splits from week 11 through 18, you'll see that he had a 90.8 rushing grade, which was tops amongst the running back position. His yards after contact per attempt, 13th, averaging 3.2. His first down touchdown rate, 24.8%. That was also 13th. And Pollard also ranked 5th in avoided tackles per attempt at 0.29 during those final 8 weeks. Perhaps the biggest thing in all of this is that the Titans add another pass catcher to this offense, as Pollard has produced 1,318 receiving yards on 176 receptions in 5 seasons. Tennessee is going to continue to lean heavily on the run game, which averaged 108.6 yards per game last season, and hope that their second-year quarterback there in Will Levis can get this passing game going, which finished as the 4th worst last season. Tennessee knew that they were losing Derrick Henry, so adding Tony Pollard to a backfield Tajay Spears is a very solid move. Let's give it a B. Now, a move that I'm not as big a fan of, and it's probably because I have this thing against Gabriel Davis in general, but the Jacksonville Jaguars did sign the former Buffalo Bill wide receiver early on. I'll be honest, this does absolutely nothing for me, except perhaps lets me know that the Jaguars are pretty much out when it came to Calvin Ridley. Now, I know they were probably in it to the 9th hour, but they had to have a contingency plan if things were to go south. Now, last season with the Bills, Davis averaged 16.6 yards per reception to go along with those 7 touchdowns. So he's that deep threat. He's a guy that Trevor Lawrence can look for in the end zone. But there are some that believe that Davis was never really used the way that he probably should have been in Buffalo. But Josh Allen under center, you'd have to hope for more production than what we got. I mean, we got a little bit of a glimpse of that Kansas City Chiefs game, and then it got totally taken away from all of us. Now, my biggest beef with Davis is that he's never getting drafted where he should actually be drafted when it comes to fantasy football. Fantasy managers, they're always reaching for him early on because his production has indicated that he doesn't deserve to be there. But for whatever reason, there's some sort of promise out there that he's going to be the next big thing. Guess what? He is a victim of production never living up to that promise. And that's kind of where we're at. If you take Davis as what he is, then it's not as bad if you can get him later on in the drafts. The 24-year-old wide receiver now gets that change of scenery there, which is not going to hurt him, along with a new 3-year deal, $39 million. This is money for like Saquon Barkley. We're paying Gabriel Davis the same kind of money that we're paying Saquon Barkley. In 4 seasons in Buffalo, Davis, he hauled in 163 passes, 2,730 yards to go along with his 27 career touchdown grabs. Again, that's basically what Saquon Barkley did as a receiver. We're not even counting what he was able to do on the ground. But hey, you know what? I digress. As for fantasy, Davis is a downgrade when it comes to Calvin Ridley for this Jaguars passing attack. And he's going to be in there battling with Zay Jones to see who's the third option behind Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram in this passing offense. I don't have Davis as much more than a bye-week flex option. And that's if you're getting pretty desperate. Any signing that involves Gabriel Davis doesn't really deserve a letter grade. So I'm going to go with a D here. Losing Calvin Ridley for Davis and Duvernay, that is definitely what you call a downgrade with a capital D. Now, the Green Bay Packers, they are expected to sign Josh Jacobs. Now, this one hurts. This one stings. This comes as a major surprise to me because I really did think that AP and Josh Jacobs had a thing going. But again, here's that franchise tag, and here's another running back leaving because of a franchise tag. I don't know if that's what went to it, but there was probably some hurt feelings along the way. Now, when you read the writing on the wall, you knew that it was just a matter of time before Aaron Jones ended up getting his cut, and he ended up moving on here as well. As the Packers said, hey, we could save $11.8 million because Jones is set to make $17.5 next season. So that's addition through subtraction when it comes to the cap for the Green Bay Packers. Now, Jacobs has 1,305 carries in 5 seasons, resulting in over 5,500 rushing yards. He's also added 1,448 receiving yards, and he's just a season removed from winning the rushing crown. Now, Jacobs, he's a great back, but there is some room for concern. And take this, I'm a Raiders fan. I watched quite a bit of film here. Last season, his explosive run rate, that dipped to 3.9%. That was 48th out of 49 qualified running backs. His yards per carry, it ranked 44th at 3.5. His yards after contact per carry, that dropped to 46 as he averaged just 2.4 yards per attempt, while his forced tackle rate, 0.12, that was tied for 43rd. So that's where the concern is when it comes to the Raiders potentially signing Josh Jacobs. And then looking back, go, hey, you know what? We got the Zamir White kid. He did pretty good there down the back stretch. So, I mean, that's probably where the Raiders kind of weighed the value of Josh Jacobs with what they already had in-house. Now, it was a little touch and go there when I was trying to figure out what Jacobs' value was going to be until the Packers did officially release Aaron Jones, who ended up signing elsewhere pretty darn quickly. Now, Jacobs should firmly be considered a top 12 running back as he still projects to be in an explosive offense there in Green Bay. Not only is Josh Jacobs maybe an upgrade as far as ball carrying is concerned there when you look at Aaron Jones, but when given an opportunity, he can be effective in the passing game. So you may take a little bit of a dip there, but it's not going to be that much. As for Jordan Love, this makes him much, much, much more dangerous. Jacobs is an offensive upgrade here for this Arsenal here in Green Bay. And the second-year starter in Jordan Love, this is going to help him make that next evolution as far as his maturation and his gameplay is concerned. Jacobs and Love, they're actually the elder spokespeople for this offense at 26 and 25 years old. We got Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Warren, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, Bo Melton. All these guys, they're under the age of 24. I got 5 kids older than the starters there in Green Bay. Now, after the release of Jones and the savings that came along with it, I'm going to give this move a B+ because I kind of like it as far as Josh Jacobs is concerned and how it works for the Packers offense moving forward. Perhaps the biggest name in all of free agency was Kirk Cousins, and he is heading down to Atlanta. That's right, the Dirty Birds are welcoming the Dirty Goat, at least the GOAT when it comes to free agency money, because that's what Kirk Cousins truly is. The Atlanta Falcons, they signed the Pro Bowl signal caller to a whopping 4-year, $180 million deal with $100 million of that guaranteed, people. Dollar bills, Ball. Imagine all the ice that Kirk Cousins can get for those plane rides home there after the Falcons road games. Now, Kirk Cousins, I told you, GOAT when it comes to free agency money. The Vikings, they were said to be in discussions with Cousins right up until the very end. But when it's all said and done, happy wife, happy life. We know Kirk Cousins' wife is from the Atlanta area, and that probably could have been the deciding factor. Kirk Cousins, his value, it actually takes a bump up. I mean, that's saying something. I mean, you go from Justin Jefferson and your value actually increases. Well, look, Drake London, he should be considered a top 12 wide receiver heading into those 2024 drafts. Bijan Robinson, one of the top running backs in the league. Kyle Pitts had 1,000 yards as a tight end his rookie season. And let's be honest, Kyle Pitts' value could not have gone any lower. This is a huge boost for him. TJ Hawkinson, 960 yards with Kirk Cousins. Jordan Reed also flirted with 1,000-yard seasons with Kirk Cousins in Washington. Question is, will Pitts relinquish that number 12 to Kirk Cousins? I mean, if you want a 1,000-yard season, you want that ball, you better give Kirk Cousins that number 8 if he wants it. Now, obviously, there's some concern when it comes to Kirk Cousins, who's coming off that Achilles injury, and he's going to be 40 years old once this deal expires. But Cousins, his body of work, that's why he's the top free agent on the market, Achilles injury or not. Prior to last season, Cousins had thrown for over 4,200 yards in 3 straight years and has thrown for more than 4,000 yards in 7 of the last 9 years. Expectations for Cousins should put his numbers somewhere around 4,000 yards passing with 27 to 30 touchdowns, assuming his recovery is going well and it is on schedule, which makes him an ideal second quarterback to roster, which could easily become a starter, which is pretty much what his role has been in his entire fantasy career. With the Buccaneers locking up Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield, the Falcons, they needed to make a move in the South and open this division. This division is about as open as any in the NFL. And in my opinion right now, these moves the Falcons are making are putting them at the top of the division. I love this deal for the Falcons. I love this deal for Kirk Cousins. I love it for Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. I just love this deal everywhere you can possibly get it. This gets me an A right now for fantasy. Now, speaking of those running backs, I've seen that franchise tag. Saquon Barkley, well, guess what? He's heading home. Barkley is signing with the Philadelphia Eagles. And the best part is, besides that payday, he gets to face the Giants twice a year. It also didn't hurt that 3-year deal worth $37.75 million. The deal that also has $26 million that guaranteed, which could be worth up to $46.75 million. Yeah, that's a pretty good reason to go from New York to Philadelphia, if you ask me. With this deal, Barkley, he also becomes the second highest paid running back in NFL history on an average per year salary. According to Jordan Schultz, insider there when it comes to the NFL, the Giants, they didn't even make an offer for Barkley, and it came down to the Bears, who went out there and got DeAndre Swift, as well as the Houston Texans and the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, here's hoping that the Eagles put more trust in Barkley when it comes to those goal line carries than they did with DeAndre Swift a season ago. Last season, when it was goal to go, it became all about the brotherly shove, the tush push, whatever you want to call it. Philadelphia's new look offense, it's scary on paper, but it's pretty much the same thing we saw last year. We're just substituting Saquon Barkley and DeAndre Swift. That's the only big move that we're seeing. Last season, the Eagles, 8th in the NFL, averaging 128.8 rushing yards per game. While Jason Kelce is gone, the Eagles' offensive line is still one of the strongest units in the league. Last season with the Giants, Barkley, he fell 38 yards shy of 1,000 on the season, but with the upgrade there in Philadelphia, he can return closer to that 2022 form, which saw him rush for 1,312 yards, and that's probably what you should expect there, somewhere in that 1,200 to 1,300 yard range. As for fantasy, it all comes down to those goal line touches. But after finishing his RB16 in that Mickey Mouse Giants offense last season, even if Hurts does keep some of that goal line work there, Barkley should once again be in the conversation as a top 12 fantasy back here in 2024. Now, I see it right now. Eagles fans, you're already planning the parade. Slow your roll, pump the brakes. Howie Roseman, blink twice if you're being held against your will right now, because this does not seem like a Howie Roseman type deal. I'm giving this signing a C right now, considering the money it could have been invested elsewhere on this Eagles defense. We saw them get tore apart in their past defense last season. I'm sorry, Howie. Money spent somewhere else. You could have retained another running back because you've been doing a pretty good job at getting cheap players performing well, and you could have done that again with DeAndre Swift and saved a lot of money. Running backs have been going off the market in a hurry, probably because the running back class this season, as far as the draft is concerned, isn't very good. Well, enter Commanders adding Austin Ekeler to their backfield, inking the former Charger to a 2-year, $11.43 million deal. Washington made the decision to move away from a younger Antonio Gibson, who got a similar deal with the New England Patriots, and with a veteran like Brian Robinson to join him in the backfield. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how this dynamic is going to work. At first glance, this move, it makes very little sense. Like I said, you already got Brian Robinson here. Why do you need Austin Ekeler? But then you got to remember that Austin Ekeler is rejoining Anthony Lynn, who was his head coach in Los Angeles. So you have to figure there's already a plan in place in how they want to utilize Ekeler moving forward. Besides the familiarity there with his old coach, the Commanders also added to their offensive line with the signings of center Tyler Bidas there from the Dallas Cowboys and guard Nick Allegretti there from the Kansas City Chiefs. So those are two big signings on the offensive line. This is a team that has been busy. I mean, they've revamped their defense with guys like Bobby Wagner and Jeremy Chin and Frankie Luby. So there's been some big-time moves made on both sides of the ball. As the Commanders management, they're like, hey, you know what? We need to make some moves. We need to make this team exciting again. We've been at the bottom for far too long. That's probably why they've gone out there and signed some good veterans that can help them win right now. Now, Ekeler, he comes to Washington after 7 seasons with the Chargers organization, in which he produced 4,355 rushing yards, 3,884 receiving yards, and 69 touchdowns. And for a team that finished 2024 with a 4-11 record, the Commanders, they needed to find a way to win this season, whether it's Sam Howell under center or a rookie quarterback. The team selects a pick number 2. Now, from a fantasy perspective, I don't like this move. This is another one of these moves like Saquon Barkley. I'm not excited about this. I like that the Commanders added to their offensive line. I like the pieces that this offense has at their disposal. But this really feels like a lateral move. I don't get what you're gaining by going from Antonio Gibson to Austin Ekeler, who's a much, much older. I mean, listen, Antonio Gibson is basically a younger, bigger, stronger, faster version of Austin Ekeler. Eckler's value, it comes in the passing game, in which he saw a 47.8% route participation rate in 2023. Well, guess what? Gibson was second in route participation rate at 45.8%. I think it's going to be pretty obvious what Eckler's new role in DC is going to be. So I have to give this signing a C+, because I don't like it. I mean, there were better moves to be made out there. Other teams made better signings. This just wasn't it. Now, speaking of a signing that I kind of dig a little bit, it's Gardner Minshew becoming a Las Vegas Raider. You know what? I can picture it right now. Gardner Minshew on the strip in a pair of bedazzled jorts. I mean, you can picture it right now, can't you? He looks like the Pirate. You put sunglasses on the Raiders logo, and that is Gardner Minshew. Look, I can't wait to see him do what he does on 2 years, $25 million type contract. It's not exactly starter type money, but it's not backup money either. This is telling you that the Raiders have him as a bridge type quarterback for now. So you can expect Minshew and Aiden O'Connell to kind of battle it out at training camp, or it could be a rookie like a Michael Penix. These guys could all be in the running for the job, and there's not going to be a whole lot of, hey, we're paying you all this money. No. Gardner Minshew, he's been there and done that. Now, the signing for Minshew really does mean that the Raiders didn't really view Aiden O'Connell as that starting caliber quarterback after his mini audition last season. It also tells you that Coach AP, he wants players to have a similar mentality that he has on his own there. I mean, hey, AP thinks a certain way. Gardner Minshew, he's the same kind of guy right there as far as that mentality is concerned. When Anthony Richardson went down last season, everyone turned their backs on the Colts, but Gardner Minshew was like, hey, I'm going to get ready to rock and roll here. Let's go. And he turned this Colts team into something. Minshew, he's flawed in some areas. There's no doubt about it. But when he makes up for all those shortcomings with his compete factor. He's never believing that he can't make that throw. He's never believing that he can't win that game. Minshew finished 2023 with 3,305 passing yards, completing 62.2% of his passes, 15 touchdowns. In the 15 games in which he threw at least 10 passes, the Colts, they were 9-6, including a Week 17 victory over this Raiders team. All in all, good move for the Raiders. Gives them some flexibility there to draft another quarterback and let him develop for a couple years, or go out and grab one if they deem necessary. Minshew, he's going to be able to come in right away. He's going to win you some games. So this is an upgrade for both Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. So you can expect both of them to have an uptick in catchable balls. I mean, that's something they didn't see a whole lot of last year, were catchable balls between Jimmy Garoppolo and Aiden O'Connell. Now let's see what else the Raiders do. But for now, let's go with a B. Devin Singletary heading to the Big Apple. The New York Giants, they didn't offer Saquon Barkley a contract. They likely decided to allocate their money to that defensive line when they made that trade, that sign and trade type deal there with the Carolina Panthers that landed them the edge defender that everyone wanted, Brian Burns. Now, Carolina, we'll talk about this later. They could have got 2 first-round picks last season there from the Los Angeles Rams. But hey, you know what? They said, hey, we'll take a 2 and a 5 this year. That seems good. Now, Singletary, he's only signing a 3-year deal worth $16.5 million. So there's some savings to be had right there. In Singletary, the Giants are getting an underrated back who will now get an opportunity to show what he can do. And I expect the Giants to still draft another running back, but I also believe that this is Singletary's chance to prove himself. We saw him compete with Zack Moss and Dameon Pierce in the past for touches, and he's carved out a role for himself, averaging 4.6 yards per carry throughout his career while splitting touches. Each of the last 3 seasons, he has at least 800 rushing yards and more than 175 yards in each of those seasons. So he can get you some yards. He can be that guy. Now, perhaps more important for this Giants organization is the fact that Singletary has missed just 1 game over the last 4 seasons. And we've all heard that sometimes your best ability is your availability. And Saquon Barkley wasn't always available. I low-key like this move for the Giants and for fantasy. Singletary's 212 forced missed tackles since 2019. That is the 12th most. Barkley, he sits 18th in that category over that same period of time. New York adds a capable back and spends money along their defensive line. That's a win right there. They're actually getting better as a team. As for Singletary, let's not forget that from week 10 on last season, he was the RB9 in fantasy, and he averaged 14.4 fantasy points per game in PPR formats. I'm probably higher than most on him, but this is a B+ for the Giants. They have no risk here, and you can still draft Devin Singletary much later in your drafts, and you're going to get some value there. Now, the Bengals, they were a little bit busy too. They traded away Joe Mixon, and they signed Zack Moss. Zack Moss is getting a 2-year deal worth $8 million to be what appears to be the lead back in Cincinnati. Since he still has Chase Brown, and they're more likely going to draft another running back there. But Moss, he's going to get an opportunity to continue his strong play from last season. In that 2023 season, Moss finished with 793 rushing yards, with 64.8% of those yards coming after contact. Hey, he's your prototypical plugger there going up the middle between the tackles. He forced 36 missed tackles and averaged 4.3 yards per carry while filling in for an injured Jonathan Taylor. Another stat that really gets Joe Burrow's attention, how about 65.6 pass blocking grade there that Moss produced? That was 11th best at the running back position. If you look at Moss in 11 personnel operating out of shotgun, which he did with the Colts, and the Bengals did that 58% of the time, he ranks 4th with 15 explosive runs, 6th in yards per carry at 5.2, 9th in 0.21 when it comes to those missed tackles forced per attempt, and his 3.1 yards after contact per attempt, that's 11th. Now, I'm not saying here that I'm good when it comes to math here, but the Bengals, when they released Mixon, they saved roughly $6 million. They turned around and gave $4 million that to Zack Moss, and they kept $2 million, hopefully to put towards T. Higgins' long-term contract. I doubt it, but hey, it's a thought. Now, if this signing does that, it makes it even look better here, but I'm on an island. I do think that Moss is a high-end RB2 this upcoming season based on the scheme fit. This is a move that works for both the Bengals and for Zack Moss, and it should work for fantasy managers too. Now, I could easily see him becoming in the same range as some of the big guys on this list, the same as Josh Jacobs, in that RB10 to RB15 range, where we get a couple players that come out of nowhere each and every year. I'm not going to call him a sleeper back because you shouldn't be sleeping on him after what we saw him do last season. As for grade, I reserve the right to change it depending on any kind of additional moves, but this is a good B, and there's nothing wrong with a B. With the Packers signing Josh Jacobs, we knew that Aaron Jones was going to be released, and he was. So it didn't take Aaron Jones very long to find a new home with division rival, the Minnesota Vikings. He called up Minnesota and said, hey, give me 1 year, give me $7 million, and give me an opportunity to play the Packers twice a year to prove to them that this was the wrong move. And hey, we know Minnesota, they've got their weapons there. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and Sam Darnold. Oh, man, Sam Darnold is a bridge quarterback. He just doesn't do it for me. I mean, this maybe helps out Aaron Jones having Sam Darnold as a quarterback, because with Sam Darnold, he simply cannot complete passes. You know what? We'll talk about that probably a little bit later. Now, Jones, he only played 11 games last season, dealing with a series of ailments throughout the year. But when he was healthy, he was as good as any back in the league. In his final 5 games, including the playoffs, Jones was averaging 5 yards per carry, and he ran for more than 100 yards in each of those contests. Even taking into account his 889 total yards last season, Jones has produced at least 1,000 yards in 4 of the past 5 years, including 3 1,000-yard rushing campaigns. In 7 seasons in Green Bay, Jones has racked up 5,940 rushing yards while adding over 2,000 yards in the passing game, totaling 63 touchdowns. That is production that the Minnesota Vikings will welcome with open arms after that whole Alexander Madison experiment failed last season. Now, from a fantasy lens, this move, it makes plenty of sense. Jones is going to lose some touches to Ty Chandler, but we've seen Jones operate out of a committee before and still produce. Chandler handing some of those touches, that's going to allow Jones to be more efficient with his opportunities. With Jones' ability to run the ball and his pass-catching abilities, it's reasonable to suggest that he's in line for another 1,300 total yards combined type season here in Minnesota. He should firmly be in that RB2 type category there, in that 12 to 24 type range with some high-end upside any given week. Now, I love myself a good revenge narrative. That's why I'm giving this signing a B+, because I could care less what he does the rest of the season, but if he goes out there and plays the Packers and puts it on him twice a year, I'm going to enjoy it, even as a fantasy manager. The Patriots are pairing Antonio Gibson with Ramondre Stevenson, another free agent signing. Gibson, he's leaving Washington in favor of New England on a 3-year, $11.25 million deal. Part of me is like, hey, the Patriots are like, yeah, you know what? Antonio Gibson might be a running back, but we need pass catches. We are desperate. We have very few of them. We don't even know who our quarterback's going to be. We signed Jacoby Myers, but he's probably just a placeholder for Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Jay McCarthy there, whoever ends up falling down. Now, in 4 seasons with the Commanders, Gibson, he has caught 172 passes, 1,283 yards came out of that. He's also had 2,643 yards on the ground on 642 attempts, averaging 4.1 yards per carry. Now, Gibson's pass-catching ability is what the Patriots most likely fell in love with, what they found attractive there, as he has currently produced 3 consecutive seasons with at least 40 receptions. And that's going to be a nice compliment to what Ramondre Stevenson is capable of doing on the ground. Now, I'm going to be honest, Gibson is probably the most exciting part of this Patriots offense, at least for now. New England with Mac Jones, the play calling, it was boring. It was predictable. It was just horrible, okay? Gibson, he adds some much-needed versatility to this once stagnant offense. As far as fantasy is concerned, Gibson finds himself in a very familiar role as the one he had there in Washington. He'll get a majority of the receiving work and work out of the backfield as far as third down is concerned in an offense that lacks offensive weapons. So there is a slight upgrade in that aspect. Stevenson, he's going to remain as that RB1, which is going to really kind of lower that ceiling when it comes to Antonio Gibson's fantasy production here. Gibson, he's a weekly flex type play here. Once those bye weeks really kick in, unless there's an injury to Ramondre Stevenson, which we saw go down last season. In that case, Gibson, he gets an opportunity to be an RB2. Overall, New England, they needed to add some playmakers to this offense. So in my grading system, this gets a B-. With that all being said, this has been part 1 of the NFL free agency frenzy. Stick around. Part 2 is coming at you next.